In a world threatened by a mysterious creature called Shade, a group of young people are trapped in a dormitory. One of them, Eris, tragically dies in a fierce confrontation with the Shade, leaving the survivors to face an enemy they may not be able to combat. As night approaches, they prepare to confront the Shade again. But a grave question looms: can they truly kill this creature? Or will they become its prey once more? Thank you for your subscription and likes. I hope you will leave your comments in the comments section. Chapter 15. We spent the rest of the day in the karaoke room, singing, partying, and just doing our best to forget what would come this night, even if just for a moment. Harmony was standing at the side of the karaoke machine, away from us who were all seating at the sofa. She was singing to Taylor Swift's Jump Then Fall, hitting all the notes with ease. The girls were singing along. The speakers were cranked up to the max. I can feel every bass beat thumping in my chest. The glass table was filled with bottles of Pepsi and Mountain Dew. Everyone was holding either a plastic cup or a bag of junk food, except Kana, who was holding a pinkish beverage in her tall, drinking glass with a straw. "What's that?" I asked her. "Oh, it's strawberry milkshake," Kana said. Then she closed her eyes and pressed her hand on her forehead as if in pain. Brain freeze. Yup. She held out her drink to me, her free hand massaging her temple. "Want a taste?" I took a sip. "Wow, this is good," I said. "Where'd you get this?" "Made it myself," Kana straightened up. "Looks like the pain subsided. Can I have it back?" "Sure." I took one last, long sip before giving it back to her. "It's really good." Kana inspected the glass, which is about half empty now. "Yeah, no kidding." So, Kana said, finishing her milkshake, "What do you think Major Coleman is planning?" "I don't know," I said, which is 100% true. I don't know what the military protocol is when something like this happens. But it is obvious that they're gonna test things out. "Based on what you said, right?" Leo said, flipping through the pages of the songbook. "He looks more interested in choosing another song to impress the girls with, right?" I said, almost in a whisper. Eris stopped clapping to the beat. "You know, after seeing those eyes," she said, "you just can't help but wonder what else is new." "Put it another way," Kato said. "You start thinking if the Shade rule still applies." That made Leo looked up from the songbook. I turned my attention to Harmony. "She probably doesn't hear us because she looks like she's having fun." "Sure it does," Demi said. "If he was just being positive, his voice doesn't show it. I think he truly believes what he just said." The UV lights still worked, right? Otherwise, the Shade would have just run straight towards us. Just then, the cook, siblings Darius and Scarlet, along with Caprice, came in with plates of fries, chicken nuggets, the frozen, pre-cooked kind, and different kinds of dips. Ever since the trio volunteered to cook our breakfast, Major Coleman made them our official cooks. And I'm not complaining. What they've prepared for lunch earlier, buttered chicken and breaded pork chops, was simply amazing. Caprice even baked brownies. We scooted over so they could sit. Eris took a chicken nugget and clinked it to her plastic cup. Of course, that didn't make any sound, so she knocked on the table instead to get our attention. "Hey everyone, how about a round of applause for our volunteer cooks here?" she said. "For real, we can't thank you enough." "Yeah, thanks man," I said. "I would have offered to help you guys, but all I can do is boil eggs." A faint smile appeared on Darius' face. "I want to say that I'm just doing my part, or that I love cooking, which I do, don't get me wrong," Darius said. "But to be honest, I'm doing this because it keeps me busy enough not to think about tonight." Well, that ruined the mood. Not that I blame him, though. Especially it's their Group B, on duty tonight. "You should try baking," Caprice said, after a few seconds of silence. "It's a good distraction, and the smell of bread baking makes me feel like I'm back at home." This time, Darius smiled, a warm, genuine one. "Your brownies were amazing, by the way," he said. "What else do they teach you at Peregrine?" "Well, let me show you." Caprice stood up, holding her hand out to Darius. "We should be starting now if we wanted to make it by dinner." We watched the two of them go out, leaving Scarlet behind. "That was easy," she said. Then she got up and followed the two. "What was?" I asked. "That was," Leo said. I looked at Kana for answers, but she didn't give me any, so I just dropped it. Harmony rejoined us at the sofa. "Your turn," she said, passing me the microphone. I looked at the machine and saw that there are no more songs in the queue. I haven't decided yet. Come on, you're the only one who hasn't sing yet, Harmony complained. Hey, Eris said with a soft voice. It's okay if you suck. It's just us here. Hey, I protested. What? She said innocently. Are you saying you're good? As I opened my mouth, I realized that she's not wrong and I don't have any clever comeback. So I decided to keep my mouth shut. They started to chant my name to get me to sing. All right, fine. Don't say I didn't warn you. They let out a triumphant whooping. After last night, I feel like screwing around. And I just know the perfect song for it. Good thing the songbook has it. The machine beeps for every number I punched in the microphone, followed by a robotic voice repeating the number. Zankaku na tenshi no unai shounen yoshinwa and I ne'er the anime intro started. I heard groaning, some of them were laughing, and a few kind souls shushing those who were laughing, even though they were barely holding it in. Aoi kaze ga imimmune no doa with tataite moi sang. My hand gripped the microphone tighter, because I'm cringing hard. They must have realized what they have done because they started calling me weeb. In an attempt to make it stop, but they are too late. Cannot be stopped. I am unleashed. So the time passed with us singing and snacking. 2 empty plates later, we cleaned up and unplugged everything in the karaoke room since it was almost 5:30. We were on our way to the dining area, carrying empty plates and a trash bag when the roaring engines outside stopped us on our tracks. Curious, we all went out, pulled by the unfamiliar scene. Darius, his sister Scarlet, and Caprice were already out here. We greeted them as they came over and watched the 2 military trucks pulling over. When they parked in front of the dorm, armed men in camouflage came spilling out the back of both trucks, army boots stomping the grassy field flat. I count at least a dozen of them. Some soldiers stopped in front of the dorm and faced the trees, with equal distance from each other. Some soldiers marched around the building. I have no idea of what's happening, so I looked for Major Coleman among the commotion, and spotted him just as he was getting out of one of the trucks. We ran over to him. Major, hey, what's going on? I asked. We're setting up a perimeter, Major Coleman explained. If this thing really does possess a physical body, then we can assume that bullets can now hurt it. Maybe even kill it if we're lucky. And if we're unlucky, Kato said, my men are equipped with UV searchlights so they're not completely defenseless, Major Coleman explained. Then the raised his hand. Now about our meeting this morning. He then confirmed that the wood that killed Kent did come from the fallen tree. He also told us that Mr. Donovan's body was cut in half diagonally, from the left abdomen to the right should. It was a clean cut through the muscles, organs, and bones. The angle of the cut was consistent with that of the tree. Our testimonies that suggested it was made with one swift, silent stroke made forensics admitted of lacking the proper explanation. As such, there's been a change of plan, Major Coleman continued. We had been granted permission to use whatever we have at our disposal to test the validity of Virgil's theory here. The UV lights turned on, but it didn't get any reaction from us since we were too occupied with what Major Coleman was saying. So eat up, and I'll be expecting Group B out here at exactly 6. He then left us and started barking orders at his men to move the tree. We all filed silently back to the dorm and into the dining area. The cooks had already set the table. Everybody took their seats. The trio outdid themselves this time. Roasted whole chicken that smelled of garlic and other spices. 2 huge bowls of golden fried rice with green peas and diced carrots. And a large pot of pork adobo. They even made dessert creamy, fruit salad served in a glass bowl. But even these weren't enough to lighten the mood. We ate in silence. Group B, which included the cooks Darius, Scarlet, Caprice, and homeschooled girl, Indigo finished fast and went out. The rest of us took our time. There were small talks here and there, but it was very unlike the fun ambience we've had during breakfast. Just like how I've thought it would be. We waited till all had finished, cleaned up, and went out too. In the visitors' lounge, I can't help but linger, staring at the glass, sliding door. Leo came up on my side. You can't leave it alone, can you? The whole thing's based on my idea, so I don't think Major Coleman would mind, Kana suggested. Eris started pushing us. Let's go, then. As we stepped out of the dorm, we saw Major Coleman and his men stood at rest, assault rifles strapped to their shoulders. It was a cloudless night. The moon glows brightly in the sky. UV lights of the dorm and of the lamps across are in full effect, giving the night that eerie, bluish-violet hint. The trees were silent. Not a single leaf rustles in the somewhat darker and colder night. Major Coleman saw us came out, gave us a quick nod and turns his attention back to the trees. Clearly not interested in any of us, so we went ahead and sat down the railing below the kitchen window where Group B was. Even though we aren't required out here, there were also no rules restricting us from joining other groups' duty. And since we aren't expected to do Group B's job for them, only they had their handbooks with them. Still, no sign of the shade. Wherever it is, I hope it stays there. Though I know there was never a night where the shade didn't appear. It's exactly 6:00 daylight is a good 11 hours away. This is going to be a long night. Eris sat next to me. I so want you to be wrong. My lips curled upwards a bit. That makes two of us. Our heads turned to the glass door when it slid open. Hey, Leo called out to Kato. He nodded back and walked over to us. We waited, chatted with Group B and waited some more. The hours went by, painfully slow. What time is it? I asked Eris. She checked her wristwatch. Exactly midnight. I thought of giving it a couple of minutes or so before going inside and off to bed, when a drop of rain fell on my hand. Turned into a downpour. I watched as the ground darkened as the rain continued to pour. That's when I caught something moving on the ground. Did you see that? I said. See what? Darius said. I pushed myself up from the stone railing, moving a bit closer to the spot where I've seen it till the roof run out. My hair and shirt was drenched in the cold rain in no time, chilling my entire body. Virgil, Kana said. I ignored her and stared hard at the ground, determined not to miss whatever it was this time. Then, a moment later, there it was again. The black streaks on the ground began moving. It was the shadows. The shadows of the trees started coming together, swirling up in a black vortex till a floating shadow of a man formed. Finally, Major Coleman said. He raised his hand and gave out the command fire at will. The barrage that followed was deafening. We were on our feet, our hands covering our ears. The place lit up in flashes of lights. Bullets sprayed down the direction of the shade. I was expecting my dorm mates who went to their rooms first to come out running, but the entrance never slid open. It is impossible to think that they didn't hear any of that. I'm sure they just decided to stay put where it's safe, locked up in their rooms. Ceasefire. Major Coleman commanded. Kids, do not come in any closer, understand? We didn't argue. Lowering their smoking rifles, the soldiers switch on their flashlights, assessing the damage done. The bright lights showed us the trunks full of bullet holes and the missing branches of the trees. But I didn't see what I was looking for. What we were all looking for. The shade was nowhere in sight. Chapter 16. We started murmuring to ourselves. Did they get it? It's gone. Just like last night. Come on, let's get out of here. I second that. I'm right behind you, I told them. When they started to run back inside, I ran towards Major Coleman. I have to tell him that this thing's not done yet. Major Coleman, but before I could tell him, a soldier called out his attention. Sir, he said, pointing at something in front of him. It's unharmed, sir. I followed his gaze and saw it too. This shadowy body was devoid of bullet holes. There's no way those bullets missed that thing. This time, the shade floated still before growing two black legs and dropped to the ground. It raises one of its arms to its side at shoulder length. Its arms and fingers elongated to a point before curving inward, thin and sharp, till it resembles the weapon of the Grim Reaper, a black scythe. The image of the falling tree last night came back to my mind. The clean, smooth cut. It all fits. Now we know how the shade did it. But what does that mean for us haunteds? I tried not to think about it, and focused on the shade in front of me. It raised its leg and stepped forward, one foot after the other, leaving a wake of stomped patches of grass where it walked. Wait, if it's stomping the ground, then. Major Coleman, I said, maybe another round. Major Coleman raised his eyebrow. It didn't work. It will. This time, I said, covering my ears again. He stared at me in silence. But rather than have me explain, he raised his hand again and gave the command to open fire at the shade. It worked, all right. Bullets are hitting the shade square on its head, its chest, everywhere. But instead of hurting the creature, its skin swallows up the bullets upon impact. Some remained stuck on its body. Some fell harmlessly to the ground. Switch to U.V. Major Coleman ordered. Unnerved by what has unfolded in front of them, the soldiers swung their rifles around and turned on searchlights they were carrying. But the shade already turned on its heel and retreated to the safety of the trees. Follow it, Major Coleman ordered. The soldiers started to pursue, but the shade swipes at a tree it passed by with its scythe arm before disappearing into the darkness. Look out, a soldier called. The tree slammed hard to the ground, stopping the soldiers in their tracks. Then more slicing sounds rang from behind the trees. Major Coleman, this is what happened to us last night. It's the shade cutting up wood to throw at us, I said. He didn't give it another thought. Pull back. Watch out for the agonized scream of a man cuts him off. The night came alive with the sounds of missiles whistling through the air. Searchlights were broken in quick succession in every soldier's hands. I hid behind Major Coleman. The street lamps surrounding us and the wall lights on the dorm exploded in a burst of sparks. Men keep falling down, hit by flying projectiles. Get inside, he shouted at me. Keeping my head down, I ducked inside. The rest were already gathered down here. From the looks of their faces, I can tell that they already have an idea of what's happening outside. I huddled up to them, keeping our eyes on the entrance. Panic was starting to build up. Shut up, Eris shouted, stopping anyone from freaking out. Panicking won't help. She's right, Leo said in a much calmer voice. As long as we're inside, it won't reach us. Through the glass sliding door, I could see Major Coleman's men, limping away from the entrance, with the U.V. lamps outside and the U.V. wall lights installed around the dorm itself destroyed, along with their searchlights. He must have ordered them to bring out their spare from the trucks because they are leaving the entrance unprotected. But even if the shade attempted to come after us here, the U.V. ceiling lights inside will burn it away. Can't harm us. Not here. Then again, that's what we all thought last night. But as expected, the shade stopped in front of the sliding door, just out of reach of the violet wall created by the U.V. ceiling lights over our heads. It dropped on all fours. On its face, a slit appeared horizontally, opening up into a hole below its blood-red eyes. The base and the top part of the hole grew jagged, pointed edges. Then I realize I'm looking at the shade's mouth, and those were its teeth. Sharp, deadly, dangerous. It threw its neck back and opened its mouth wide, letting out a monstrous roar. It was so loud that it shook the place. We covered our ears because it was starting to hurt. I can feel its roar resonating inside my chest. But what is it doing? Is it just frustrated that it can't get to us? Or is it trying to kill us by making our ears erupt? I've never heard of anyone dying from loud noise. Out of the corner of my eye, something caught my attention. A glass pitcher on top of a table. Water was trickling down from the crack on its side. Then I realized what was happening. I looked up and saw the same thing. The lights above were cracking from the vibrations of the roar. We have to get out. The moment the lights break, we're dead. But where can we go? The shade is blocking our exit. If we hide in any room down here, we would only trap ourselves. There's only one option. I pulled on Eris' shoulder, forcing her to face me. I pointed up to the ceiling lights. She looked up and got my meaning. She took a deep breath and shouted above the noise. Get upstairs. I was already on the landing to the second floor when they started racing for the stairs. Darius was dragging her sister after him. I leaned a bit over the railing, looking for Kana. When I saw her, I gestured for her to run faster. She ran past me, safe upstairs. I would have turned and followed her, if only it weren't for those who were left behind, each one frozen solid where they stood. Like what happened to me last night. I shouted at my friends on the second floor for help and I went to the nearest one to the stairs. Caprice. I grabbed her shoulder from behind and shook her hard, hoping to snap her out of her frightened state. But her rigid body wouldn't budge. I got to her face. With both hands on her shoulders, I rattled her entire body, shouting at her face to run. But instead of running, she cried. At least she's no longer frozen still, so I turned her around and pushed her to the stairs. She stumbled down, so I dropped next to her. Go, I yelled. Finally, my word reached her and she ran. Soon, Leo and Eris came running down. The rest would have followed if Eris didn't yell at them to stay. It didn't take long before they finally managed to uproot the rest from their place and ran upstairs. Caprice greeted me with a hug when I got upstairs. She was still a mess, but at least she calmed down a bit. Thank you, she yelled, for not leaving me. Don't mention it, I yelled back. The roar was still deafening. Even up here. What are we doing up here? Eris shouted. Okay, maybe she didn't get what I meant, I thought. The shades trying to break the lights with its roar. I explained, straining my voice yelling. We stay down, we're stuck, with the shade blocking our way out and all. Just then, the light overhead bursts, making us scream even louder. But the roaring stopped. Only moonlight from outside streaming in through the central window of the hallway served as our light. Okay, Eris said in now a hushed voice, brushing off the pieces of debris from her hair. So what's the plan now? We'll escape through the windows, I said. We should split up. It's faster, and would buy some of us time to escape. We heard footsteps approaching, coming up the stairs. SIS it coming? Demi asked. We crept to the railing. Peeking down, we came face to face with the shade. My entire body shook. Light it up, a dominant voice commanded. Before we could react, a wave of violet light shone through the stairs, cutting the shade's body in half. Its upper torso thuds on the landing between the stairs leading up to this floor, shielded from the UV lights. It howled as if in pain. Can't really be sure since the handbook didn't mention if it can feel pain. Then again, the handbook didn't mention a lot of things we were seeing. But it didn't wait for its lower body to regenerate. Its arms elongated and bent down into sharp points. It scampered up the rest of the way, towards us using its arms as legs the same way a spider does, if spiders bore holes through wood with their legs. Go, Eris yelled. I ran to my room. Caprice and Kana followed. I locked the door. The window, I told them. Kana slid the window open and Caprice helped her lower the ladder. They must have decided for Caprice to go first because Kana is helping her up the windowsill. I backed away from the door, expecting the shade to come slamming through it. But it didn't happen. Through the closed door, we've heard Major Coleman's men screaming on the other side, followed by the sound of something heavy falling down the floor, making me jump every time. Hurry, Caprice shouted from outside. Kana went out next. I climbed out of the window. I was on my first step down the ladder when something slams hard against the door. But the door held. That's when I saw black, knife-like fingers piercing through the wooden door. I didn't have to guess who or what was behind it. Kana was still halfway down the ladder. Jump, I yelled. The moment I did, the shade sliced the door in one downward stroke, its body whole again. It sprinted towards the window. I kicked off the ladder and jumped. It tried to reach for me and clawed at me in midair. But the fall put enough distance so the tip of its razor-sharp claws barely missed my face. If I've jumped a second later, my head would have been sliced into three. We've hit the wet ground. I've never got beaten up before, but I imagine this is what it would feel like. My body was throbbing in lots of places, but my attention was on the shade that was still on my window, howling in frustration, angry that his prey slipped him by. It started to climb over, but beams of violet light burned it away. From its chest, arms all the way up to its head disappeared under the UV lights as if it was vaporized. Lying down on the grass, I cocked my head to the side and saw Major Coleman and his men keeping their UV searchlights pointed at the window. All the other haunteds were safely down as well. My friends came running down to our side. Are you okay? Eris said. I propped myself up on my arms to a seated position. I think so. Kana was groaning beside me. Caprice helped her up. Can you stand? A voice interrupted Major Coleman's, who was walking down towards us. So the lights still work, I said as I tried to do so. The pain was immediate. But I didn't stop to do a full examination, knowing that any minute now, the shade would be back. Half of its body still remains sprawled in the darkness of my room. No doubt it will reform and come back to finish the job. As far as we know, Major Coleman said. Just then, the angry howl of the shade shook the place. It must have regenerated its whole body again to be able to do so. With the only protection we have left are several soldiers with searchlights, I wondered how we will survive the night. Chapter 17. Major Coleman called for one of his men. Get them out of here. The soldier nodded. Major Coleman turned to us. This is Private Sampson. He'll keep you kids safe. Now go. Follow me, Private Sampson said. He ran ahead to the truck. My dorm mates followed. But I stayed back for a bit. What do you plan to do? I asked Major Coleman as I wiped the mud from my elbow. Keep it here while you kids get away. Run it out the clock, he said. I lingered for a moment. I want to tell him that it's still a while till sunrise. Don't worry about it. Just go. Major Coleman barked. I turned heel and run. Reaching the truck, I stepped up the lowered tailgate. The long wooden benches on either side were already occupied. Kana was sitting to my left, closest to the retractable steps I've climbed up to. She scooted over, so I took that as a sign to sit down next to her. When everyone was accounted for, Private Sampson flipped up the door, bolted it secure, and ran to the driver's seat. The truck was bare, except for the green, rectangular cases under the benches, one directly below me. Open the cases, he said from up front, through the square cut on the tarpaulin separating us from the truck's cab. I pulled the crate out from underneath and opened it. The crates contained searchlights arranged in rows. The same kind they've been using. Arm yourselves. I grabbed a few from my box and passed it along, keeping one to myself. I pressed my thumb on the switch and slid it up, frantic to see if it works, and a beam of violet light gave me a bit of relief. At least this way I can protect myself. The shade won't be able to take me that easy. Sitting on the rear, I can easily see Major Coleman with only 3 of his men left. They were still positioned outside in the rain, flashlights beaming, immersing the front of the dorm in violet rays. But they don't have enough men to cover the entire building. The shade could still get outside through the back, off the rooftop. The situation looked hopeless, desperate even. I can't bring myself to believe that they will be able to stop the shade from coming after us. The engine sputtered to life and we were on our way. Away from this place, away from the shade. As we drive away, I lie back on the bench and let out a long, drawn sigh. Around me were kids with puffy eyes and red noses, all soaked from the rain. The siblings were holding each other in a protective embrace, never letting go for even a second. Leo slumped back to his seat, his head leaning against the metal frame of the truck. A portable, camping LED lantern was hanging in the middle. I watched it swung from side to side as the truck bounced up from time to time. We have no choice but to accelerate on our way down the uneven mountain trail. Our vehicle didn't really offer much protection. It was just a light cargo truck, enclosed on all sides but the open area here on the rear. Sand-colored tarpaulin fastened around the metal skeleton of the interior of the truck, serving as body panels. But we were exhausted, terrified beyond belief, that even if it's just tarpaulin that the shade can no doubt get through in no time, it provided some sense of security. I looked at Kana. She gave me a smile. Not the one she usually wears. There's something to this one that seems fake, yes. A smile to hide what she truly feels inside. Fear, dread, and maybe a bit of relief. We all managed to keep ourselves from losing it despite everything. All our attention was redirected to Private Sampson when we heard him take a call. "It's coming," Private Sampson said. "On the floor now." He then instructed us to sit down in a circle, our back on each other so we can cover every inch of the interior of the truck. I was positioned facing the open area of the rear. With our searchlights on, we waited. We waited for what seemed like forever. But we've heard nothing except for the hypnotic tapping of raindrop on the tarp and the occasional boom of thunder. Anticipating where and when the shade might strike next made my heart pound faster than actually seeing it chasing us. My situation right now is no different than being tied to a chair, blindfolded and hearing the whirring of machines getting close and closer. It's making my brain imagine the most gruesome way the shade can kill us. A problem I wouldn't be having right now if the shade was standing in front of my face. At least that way I know what's going to happen. If it lifted its arm up and brought it down, I can jump to the side. If it swings horizontally, I can duck below it. If I got cornered, at least I know which direction I'm going to point my light at. Waiting was driving me nuts, so I was almost tempted to get up and look outside when I heard screams behind me. I twist my body to their direction. Over our heads, the tarpaulin sunk into a bowl. Something landed on top of the truck. Something heavy. It started moving, making wrinkles on the cloth ceiling. A ripping sound, and then there were 3 holes on the tarpaulin, but our flashlights were on, so when the black fingers claw its way through, it disappeared immediately. The shade bellowed, kept on poking holes on the truck. On top, on the sides, looking for a blind spot. But our defense was absolute. Every time it tears open a hole on the tarpaulin, our lights seared off its fingers. Couldn't even get an entire inch inside before it pulls back its arm, howling in pain. This attempt of the shade led to its own undoing. The truck was like a porous sponge now, violet lights seeping through every hole that it can no longer hide from our lights. A streak of violet beam must have pierced the shade in the head because, through the holes it made, I saw the shade roll off the side of the truck. We watched its honeycombed, dismembered body hit the dirt, shrinking in size as our truck left it behind. We all started asking questions to each other. Did we do it? We did it, right? Please someone tell me it's over. As I was the closest to the rear, I crouched forward till I was closed enough to grab the tailgate and pulled myself to it. From the distance, I saw its black figure lying on its back on the dirt, lifeless. But then it twitched. Its parts must have grown again or fused together because it rolled to its side and planted one arm on the ground and pushed itself up. I don't know if it's the distance, but the holes on its body looked smaller. Then it hunched down and ran, 1 foot after the other, charging at us at full speed. It's coming, I warned. The shade was gaining on us, growing larger and larger as it sprints after the truck, closing half the gap in just a matter of seconds. Mr. Sampson. Faster, I yelled. Just a minute ago, its body was still riddled with holes, but now, not a single one remained. Come on, you guys, Eris said as she crawled her way to my position. We just dropped the shade. We'll do it again. The rest rallied to the rear and together we fixed our lights at the direction of the shade. We were prepared. The shade couldn't get any closer. It tried to jump off the road, into the bushes and the trees, but we managed to slice off its leg. Then it disappeared from our sights. We let out a triumphant cheer, and a round of high fives and slaps on the back, mostly of Eris, went around. Yeah, that's what you get for messing with us, Eris said. And please stay away, Caprice begged. This is nice and all, but I just remembered that no one knows where we were going and no one told us. I crouched towards the square opening on the tarpaulin. Where are you taking us? I asked Private Sampson. He glanced back at me in the rearview mirror. Then he kept his eyes on the road, keeping both hands on the steering wheel. We were coming up the checkpoint, the gates already open. We're going through the city. I thought no one was supposed to know about this. We have no choice. The plan was to kill the shade. You saw what happened. Just sit down and buckle up. I'll get you kids to base camp, he said. That doesn't sound very convincing at all, but what choice do we have but to shut up and hope for the best? I didn't feel the need to get back to my seat. Not that it was safer there. Instead, I locked my fingers around the metal partition in front of me and held on tight. Rain and the cold wind were now coming through the holes the shade made, chilling me to the bone. But this also gave us the advantage of being able to see the shade, to know where it's going to strike next. Our eyes peeled on the road and through the punctured holes on the tarp. But we never saw the shade. I think it's still down, hidden in the forest, regenerating back the leg we cut off. Hope was growing inside of me. I was feeling pretty good of our chances of surviving this night when through the windshield I saw a lamppost crash-landed right in front of the truck. Private Sampson swerved, going around the long, downed object. The truck turned so suddenly, so violently, that everyone on the truck was thrown off of their seats, hitting the aisle with a short scream. Private Sampson must have lost control of the vehicle because the tires were still producing that painful screeching. The truck bumped to a stop. I hit my head on the hard metal partition I was holding on to. Good thing we had slowed down a lot, otherwise I would have been knocked out cold. "Everyone okay?" Private Sampson asked. We all moaned in response. "You'll be okay, now get up." No time to be in pain, he grabbed me by the back of my shirt and yanked me up. "Go," he said, with a shove forward before he unbuckled his seatbelt and kicked his door open. When I took a step forward, a guy shouted in pain. A hand grabbed my ankle. "Get off. Get off." My mind was a bit fuzzy from the impact that I didn't realize that I stepped on Darius' leg. "Sorry," I said. I hold out my hand to him and he reached for it. Maintaining my own balance was hard enough, but I pushed on my feet and managed to pull him up to a seating position. I shook my head and blinked a lot. When my mind cleared somewhat, I saw that everyone was helping everyone while Private Sampson called from outside, yelling at us to get out fast. The rear exit was swamped with everyone trying to get off the truck, so I wormed my way through the square hole, into the cab, and went out through the driver's seat instead. I stepped outside, down onto the wet concrete. My eyes followed the concrete steps to my right, leading up to a great stone arch. Chiseled into opposite sides of the top corners of its frame were two little angels holding some sort of ribbon. A set of enormous, wooden doors looms over us, with a smaller pedestrian door built into each. Anyone lost their lights? We waved ours in response. Everyone seemed to be working just fine. Then, at the landing on top of the stairs, a man who can only be the night guard based on what he was wearing, white long sleeves and black pants and shoes, appeared. He looked shaken up. His eyes were bloodshot. Must be sleeping on his job before we came crashing by the stairs. For a moment he just stood there in silence, his eyes wide open. Then his body jerked up straight like he just remembered what to do and scurried down to us. "Is anyone hurt?" the man said, addressing Private Sampson. "I'll get some." His body was turned halfway up the stairs when he trailed off. His gaze went over our heads, fixed on something behind us. Whatever he saw drained the blood from his face. He whirled back and bolted up the stairs. He disappeared. I turned around, looking down the road where we came from. Lightning flashed over the quiet street. Under the stoplight, blinking a permanent red, the shade stood. Chapter 18. Raindrops slid off its body the way rain does on the surface of a leaf. And it looks taller. Top 6 feet easy. And it's way bulkier now than it was back at the dorm. Pointed projections jutted out of its head, shoulder, elbows, and everywhere else. Its arms were so long now that its claws were almost touching the concrete road. "This way," a voice said, the night guard, his head sticking out of the pedestrian door. We crowded the door that I had to squeeze through wet hairs and shivering bodies to get inside. Fear numbed my throbbing forehead. Private Sampson entered last, securing our safety first above his own. The night guard pulled the door close and locked it. The moment the night guard turned around, a black, spear-like protrusion erupted through his stomach. Blood was dripping off the tip. We screamed and light the spear arm up. The shade pulled back what remained of its arm, shrieking. For a split second, we could see the hole on the door through the clean, puncture wound of the night guard's stomach before the surrounding intestines and part of his stomach started falling out of position. Flesh and organs were squishing against each other as they slid down, hanging loosely down his waist. The night guard fell to his knees and dropped to the floor, face first. Outside, the shrieking stopped. We started murmuring among ourselves. "Is it gone? There's no way. We've got to get out of here." "Through the back," Private Sampson said. "Go." We raced towards the back, down the center aisle, passing through long, wooden benches on both of our sides. Towering, ornate, stone columns ran alongside us, holding up the vaulted ceiling depicted with murals of winged angels that was way above our heads. The shadow below us grew darker. Then it followed us, keeping pace with our every step. "Below us!" I yelled. I pointed my light at my feet and the shadow disappeared. I dare not move my light away from the floor because I know that once I do that, the moving shadow will come back again. My friends followed my lead. The shadow spread along the floor, climbed some height of the columns, and spans the entirety of the floor of the church. Even with all of us and our lights, we simply cannot cover such a huge surface area. In the places where our light cannot reach, Up and behind the columns and wooden benches, tendrils of pure black snaked up to the air. "Keep moving," Private Samson ordered. But it was no use. We were a bunch of teenagers running through a haunted house, jumping and spinning from side to side, screaming at the slightest movement. Darius was trying to get his sister to get down the bench and run. Eris and Leo had the right idea of standing back to back. "Guys, get on someone's back," Eris barked. Those near them noticed and followed suit. It was a good attempt but is not as solid as the defense we've had back in the truck. The shade would have no trouble picking us one by one. Keeping my light on the ground, I walked backward, towards Indigo and Kana. Every time a tendril of shadow came slithering up in front of me, at my sides, I turned to that direction, burn the thing away, then keep my light on the ground again. I keep on backing up, my eyes and searchlight jumping from tendril to tendril till I bumped to someone. "Move forward." Eris barked at my side when everyone was in position. Inch by inch we moved, rotating clockwise with our lights flashing outwards or down below as we approached the altar. Suddenly, the black tendrils sticking out high up on the columns stopped writhing and were sucked down into the dark shadows. The dark shadows itself grew lighter in hue, more natural, matching the rest of the shadows of the church. Confusion stopped our party from advancing. Before we could process what was going on, a loud boom went off above our heads. When I looked up, large chunks of the domed ceiling was raining down on us. "Jump!" Private Samson yelled. I dove away, landing on my belly. My searchlight skidded across the smooth, white floors. I turned around, propping myself up on my elbows. Eris and Leo were getting up on both my sides. The floor where we were standing was absolutely demolished. The cloud of dust and the debris makes it hard to be certain of who wasn't crushed. But the lack of red on the surroundings makes me breathe a little easier. Our protective circle was broken. My first thought was to scramble to my searchlight, so I sprang to my feet and turned, only to find myself staring the shade in the face. The scythe arm already raised above my head. I couldn't move. Then the world was a blur. Next thing I know, the side of my face was resting on the cold tiles of the floor. I found myself staring at the carpeted steps leading up to the altar. "Light it up," ordered Private Samson. A wall of violet light washed over me. Then Eris screamed. I sat bolt upright. What I saw turned my body to stone. At my feet were Eris' hands. Over the puddle of glowing liquid was the rest of her. Her eyes and mouth gaping at the cross-section cut of her forearms. But her expression wasn't what I expected. She didn't look scared. Or in pain. Yes, she looked more confused. "Eris," Leo shouted. Then her face contorted and she let out a piercing wail. I don't see the shade anywhere. I didn't even hear it howl as it does when the lights burned his fingers off back at the truck. Private Samson ordered the rest to form another protective circle around Eris. When the initial screams and shock passed, we complied. Assured of the safety the lights provide, I looked over my shoulder to assess Eris' condition. She was shaking bad, staring at the bleeding, white stumps where her hands once was. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as she continued wailing. Beads of sweat were trickling down her face. I can't even imagine the pain she's in. Her desperate cries echoed throughout the place as we stood there, useless, unable to do anything. Leo broke out of formation to sit next to her. I tried to do the same. "Get back," Leo snarled. The intensity, the rage in his voice sent a chill down my spine. I took a step back, staring at him as he cradled Eris in his arms. There was no need for more words. I heard what he was saying. "This is all my fault." Anger was rushing through me. It was so unfair. Him blaming me for something I didn't ask for. But strangely, I kept quiet. I didn't protest. I didn't confront him. Couldn't. I find myself agreeing with him. I find myself thinking he was right. It was all because of me. Because I froze. Tears started rolling down his cheeks. An angry cry escaped him. Private Samson knelt to his side. "Let me see," he said. Leo helped Eris hold them up. "Is she going to be okay?" Kana sniffled, still in position. Private Samson looked up to us. "I need something to stop the bleeding with." Demi, who was bawling, took off his black hoodie and gives it to Private Samson, who immediately ripped it in half and wrapped each around Eris' wrists to bind the wound. Private Samson reached around his belt, felt his pockets. He clicked his tongue. "Call an ambulance." Private Samson ordered. "We can't." "Major had our phones," Harmony said between sobs. "I'll be back," Private Samson said. He got up and fixed his eyes on us. "Do not let her close her eyes, you understand. And don't break position." Then he rushed towards the entrance and disappeared behind the wall. But Eris was already having trouble keeping them open. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly. Leo kept begging for her to stay awake. Her face was getting whiter by the second. She wasn't breathing as much as she was gulping air. It was hard to watch, even harder to not cry. Scarlet buried her face on her brother's chest. There were no tears on Cato's face, but he was wearing a pained expression. Caprice, Indigo, everyone was a mess, but no one dared to break position. "The shade. Where?" Eris said between gasps of air. "We don't know. All I know is that the shade disappeared and hasn't returned yet." "It's gone," Leo said. He's trying his best to sound confident despite his voice cracking. "It's gone. So just keep your eyes on me." "Okay," he repeated. "Okay," Eris whispered. She managed a weak smile before she closed her eyes for the last time. Chapter 19. Hypovolemic shock. It's what happens when the body experienced a sudden loss of massive amounts of blood. Organs couldn't get enough oxygen to function properly that eventually, they stopped working altogether, resulting in death. That's what Major Coleman told us when he broke down the news we were all expecting. Eris didn't make it. When Major Coleman and his men arrived last night, they took Eris away on a stretcher, her arms covered in bandage and all. They even give her a shot of something. He went with Eris and instructed his men to take us back to the dorm. They can't really take us anywhere looking all bloody and half dead. "You want some more?" Darius asked. "Yeah, thanks." I forked a couple of hot dogs on Darius' tray and add them to my plate of bacon, pancakes, and eggs. It was 9 in the morning. We were having breakfast in the dining area, sharing the long, rectangular table made of 3 square ones pushed together. Darius, Scarlet, and Caprice were in charge of cooking again. Now that the sun's up, we just saw the full extent of damage the shade had caused last night to the dorm. All the windows were shattered. Major Coleman had the electricity shut off. It was a hazard, along with the broken lights. At the corner of the room was the heap of pieces of sharp glass that sparkles when sunlight touches it. It's a good thing the bodies had already been collected, so we were spared from seeing any more grotesque spectacle before breakfast. But there were still dark stains on the carpet on the second floor. Same cleanup as with Kent's death. But all is not grim for us. We told Major Coleman what happened. He was especially excited when we told him how the shade never came back after we burned its body. I noted that it was important to burn all of it, hands, feet, everything, based on what everyone said. I reasoned that it's why the shade never came back. There was nothing left of it. Nothing to grow back again. I argued it couldn't have been in line with Shade Rule 1. The shade disappears after each kill. Previous records suggest that number of kills vary from night to night, because Eris was still alive when the shade disappeared. Of course, this is just wild speculation on my part, something I can never hope to prove, but the rest agreed with my assessment. And with that, he left us in the safety of the dorm once again and stepped outside, saying that he had some phone calls to make. After what just happened last night, anyone would imagine that for a group of traumatized kids, having a feast would be the last thing on their minds. But no, we were in high spirits. Plates of food and soda bottles littered our table. We were celebrating the fact that we just killed the shade last night, a feat never been done before in the entirety of the whole shade history. It was Leo's idea. He gave a speech about how we should focus on the fact that the shade can be killed and do our best to keep each other alive, saying that by doing so, Eris' death would not be in vain. It's what she would have wanted, he said. And so we did. No one wants to talk about what happened to Eris, anyway. Whenever her name was brought up, we just changed the subject. Even though Leo said that it was clear the death of his best friend affected him deeply. He wasn't his usual self. He wasn't flirting with or bragging to the girls. Even if Indigo or Harmony initiated a conversation, he would just smile politely, maybe give a one-word reply and continue rolling his sausage with a fork. In fact, he barely joined in on any conversation, or even eat anything. He just kept playing with his food. A pang of guilt stabbed my heart. I tried convincing myself that I wasn't to blame, that it was 100% Eris' decision. But then again, she won't have to make that decision if it weren't for me. The door swung open and Major Coleman joined us. "Sorry for interrupting your meal," he said, pulling up an empty chair. A chair where Kent or Eris could have been sitting on right now. I shook my head and paid attention to what Major Coleman was going to say. "But I want to make sure that the information we have on this year's shade is consistent. I can't believe decades worth of information on the shade is now useless," he sighed, shaking his head. "Anyway, last night confirmed that the shade does possess a physical body. And we have Virgil to thank for that." There was round of applause, but I didn't particularly feel proud at the moment. He then proceeded to list down all the other details we had written down. Here's what we agreed on in the end. 1. The shade can transform into a solid being, and only then will it be able to affect physical matter. 2nd, it can transform any part of its body into anything. 3rd, UV lights are still harmful to the shade. No other methods are known that can hurt the shade. And lastly, burn everything of the shade's body and it will never come back. "Anything I miss?" Major Coleman asked, and we just shook our head. "I hate to do this, especially when you just lost a friend, but I have to do my job, and that is to keep you kids alive. So I have to ask, are we sure the shade is gone?" The question had us stumped. I didn't even think of that. No, that's not true. I just didn't want to consider it. In the back of my mind, there was this voice, always fearful, always wondering if the shade would return. But I chose to cling to our victory over the shade last night. I want to believe that we did it, and judging at my friends' faces, I'm guessing they do too. But now, Major Coleman is taking that hopeful feeling away from us by slapping us with some harsh truth. We don't know what happened. We don't know why the shade disappeared, and we don't know if it will come back. "I guess we'll just have to find out tonight," Major Coleman said when the only answer he got was silence. "Another thing that worries me is that a lot of my guys and one civilian ended up being butchered." "You're asking if the shade kills just about anyone now," I said. "It's a thought," Major Coleman said. "I don't think so," I said. "And why is that?" he asked. "Last night, when the shade destroyed the searchlights, it didn't come after any of your men. I mean, sure, some got killed and hurt, but it basically left them alone after the UV lights were busted and sprinted to the door. I got everyone's eyes on me now. I could have finished you off plenty of times last night," Kana added, looking at the strawberry milkshake she was stirring. "But it ignored you and ran after us instead." "And what about my men who followed you up the stairs?" Major Coleman asked. I thought that was strange too. The shade was literally in our faces, only a few steps up and we would have been minced meat. But instead, it didn't come after us, allowing us time to run to our rooms. "Maybe it wasn't fast enough. I mean, half of its body was gone," I suggested. "And your men got closer to the shade than it was to us since we were already at our room by that time. Still, why the sudden change? Why bother killing Major Coleman's men when it can get through our door the same time it would take all his soldiers to come up the stairs?" His thinking, Cato provided an answer. "Major Coleman's men were right behind and it can't get to us fast enough. It must have felt cornered. It knows your men can stop it and we can't. We didn't have the lights. They were trying to protect us like the night guard," I said. "So it took care of them first." Harmony asked. The shade felt threatened. Felt scared for its life. "Is that what you're saying?" Major Coleman ventured. "Maybe not for its life, but for its goal," Cato continued. "Your men, the night guard, they were obstacles to its mission. So the shade removed them." "Its mission?" Major Coleman asked. As Cato said. "Dead." No one spoke a word after that. Then I realized this is exactly what people feared. This is what led to the paranoia that brought about the worst mass hysteria ever recorded. Except this time it's real. "Major Coleman, if Cato's right about this," I started. "This should be kept secret from the public," he said, reaching the same conclusion as I did. "Wait," Kana said, "are you talking about that?" I nodded. History repeating itself. The dark year. Chapter 20. I remembered the mother whose son was killed in front of her by the fearful mob. My thoughts immediately went to my parents. I imagined my mom, the face she would make as she pleads my abusers to stop. I imagined my father. He wasn't much, physically speaking, but he's the type who wouldn't go down without a fight. Besides, he's got a 9mm hidden beneath their bed. I stumbled upon it once when I was looking for my shoes. I imagined him shooting at the mob as they dragged me out of the house. And the mob returned fire. I imagined the shootout, how horrible it would be to be in the middle of it. Bullets would be flying over my head. The gunshots would be unbearable up close, just like last night with the shade. Then I imagined the worst that would happen. I see my dad falling to the ground. My mom crying over his body. The last thing I would see before the mob turned to me. I gripped the edge of my seat hard that I feared blood may have stopped flowing into my hands. No parents should be made to suffer through all that. Especially not mine. That's illegal now, isn't it? Demi asked. I mean, not that mob killing was ever legal. Yes, but given our city's history, we should prepare for the worst, Major Coleman said. Cato cleared his throat. Still, it's too much of a change. This could be something else, something that didn't exist in the last decades. Indeed, Major Coleman said. His face was unreadable, making me question myself if I can really trust this guy. Maybe he knew something that we don't and suspected this might happen. Or maybe he's just used to dead bodies since he's a soldier and B had been working here for years. Or maybe I'm just so tired and hungry and freaked out that I was starting to doubt everything and everyone. Or most probably, I'm distracting myself from the fact Leo won't talk to me, won't even look at me because his best friend died because of me. If this thing really is capable of rational thought, Major Coleman said. What it did last night, throwing pieces of wood to destroy the lights, eliminating my men first, seeing them as threats. It almost thinks like a human being, wouldn't you agree? Seems like it, Cato said matter-of-factly. The way I see it, we have two options, Major Coleman said. Either find out what caused the changes to the shade and undo it or establish new rules. Both require your participation. What? Kana cried, jumping up from her seat. You mean you still plan on sending us out there? After last night? It doesn't matter what I plan to do, Major Coleman said. If the shade appeared again tonight, and we have no reason to assume otherwise, it will come for each one of you. That, I assure you, have not changed. Kana sat down. I couldn't think of anything she can say to that. I realize that you've been through a lot, Major Coleman continued. But please understand, if we don't find a way to deal with this situation, a repeat of the dark year would be the least of our problems. Our only hope right now is to figure out this new shade and make the necessary preparations. Because evidently last night, he paused, his face darkened. We cannot stop it. But we did stop it, Demi said, looking around. Right? We got lucky, Major Coleman countered. The rest of us remained quiet. We all know that he's right, that it was up to us to save ourselves. That we shouldn't be worried of something so far from the future like another dark year if we weren't even going to survive the night. I dug my nails on the bottom side of the table. I want to scream. I want to just run out of the dorm and take all my frustrations out of a tree. Kick it. Shout at it. Rip its bark. All the guilt. All the rage I'm feeling. The helplessness. Whatever hope I had left in me was gone now. Knowing that we're about to undertake something that has never been done before. That failure means death, and that we only have half a day till it's evening again. But what can we do? What choice do we have but to literally die trying? Indigo was the first to break the silence. But where would we even start? If we're going to do this, I said, keeping my head down, we're going to need everything you have, Major. All the way up from the first haunting. I'll make arrangements, Major Coleman said. For now, we need to go. Go, sir. Demi asked. You'd be in the way once the repairs have started. We'll need another place, he explained. Clean up and be ready to leave when I come back. Everyone went to their rooms to get ready. I took a quick shower and slid on a pair of black, slim-fit jeans and a plain gray polo shirt. I towel-dry most of my hair and let the rest dry in the air as I went out. I didn't run into anyone. They're probably still in the shower. Some might be already downstairs. Whichever works for me because I wanted to talk to Leo alone. His door was already open. I looked inside. Hey, I said. He didn't answer, didn't even look at me. He was sitting on his bed, absent-mindedly staring at the floor. He kept strumming the chorus to Taylor Swift's and Ed Sheeran's Everything Has Changed on his acoustic guitar. I decided to wait for a while and look around. Except for the Ed Sheeran poster on his wall, his room is pretty much the same as mine. Wondered why he even bothered bringing a poster. We'll only be here for a month. We're lucky. Although he did a good job cleaning up his room. He made his bed. Dirty clothes were all in a mesh laundry basket. I forced myself to look at him. He was in a simple long-sleeve shirt, the 3 buttons undone. His hair was tousled and wet. The guy who was so conscious of his hair that he brings his own hand mirror with him is letting others see him like this and not care. I bit my lip. The guilt forced me to lower my head. I have to say something, I thought. But tell him what exactly? That I'm sorry for his loss. That I'm sorry his best friend died because of me. Words are not coming to me right now. In the end, I was only able to say 2 words. I'm sorry. But he still kept playing, still, he refused to say anything, so I took that as a sign to leave and turned around. The strumming stopped. It wasn't your fault. I whipped around, confused. And a little bit relieved. All right, a lot relieved. But still, I don't understand. But I thought last night I wasn't angry at you, he said. He finished the song and put down his guitar on his bed. He leaned over, burying his face in his hands, angry at myself. I leaned on the doorway, waiting for him to continue. She was always like that. Always doing the first thing that pops in her head. Always making me deal with the trouble she caused. I guess I wouldn't know that about Eris. But I did notice that about her. Like that night with Mr. Donovan. I don't really know what to say to that, so I just shut up and wait for him to continue. I knew that, Leo continued. But I didn't pay attention. She was just right there, right next to me. And I let her die. That's not true, I said. If anything, it's my fault. She wouldn't have to do that if I... Shame made the words caught stuck in my throat. Didn't freeze. Leo didn't say anything. But tears started rolling down the side of his face again. Leo, if there's anything I can do. There is, he said. He stood up and walked up to me. Do what you do best. Study the shade. Keep us alive. His eyes were angry, but this time I don't think they're meant for me. Suddenly, I felt like a bag full of bricks was strapped down my shoulders. I emptied my lungs with a long, drawn-out breath. You got it, I said, looking him squarely in the eyes. I'm not so sure about this, but what else can I say? It's not like I have any other choice. We need to figure this one out if we want to survive tonight.